Hi everybody. Most of my channel is about science and philosophy, and I do have some cool stuff coming up about that, but I wanted to do something a bit different today and talk about history. I'd also like to thank these channels since I use maps and icons from them, so please don't sue me. And with that, let's begin. The year was 100 BC, and Julius Caesar was just born. Rome was governed by a republic, which was working beautifully. It was a keystone of democracy in the ancient world, but then Julius Caesar rose to power, declared a civil war, brutally taking over and getting the title dictator for life. He was then assassinated by righteous senators looking to stop this mad tyrant from becoming a king. Or at least that's what many in popular media would tell you. I mean, seriously, just look at this. The illusion that politics would always be done in a right way was shattered when Caesar came along. That could not be further from the truth. By the end of this video, you will see just how slandered and misrepresented Caesar has become in the modern worldview. But before we can talk about Caesar, we need to talk about what happened before Caesar. You see, contrary to what some will tell you, the Roman Republic was not working perfectly fine. At all. It had long been in decline, and Roman society was on the verge of collapse. So let us explore the history of how the Republic actually fell, and then we will analyze what Caesar did. It all started with the destruction of the middle class. So let's rewind the clock, all the way back to 264 BC, more than a century and a half before Caesar was born. The Roman army at this point was made up of primarily farmers. They were the traditional backbone of Rome, providing both the food, the manpower, and participating in Roman democracy. Prior to this point, Roman campaigns had been conducted in Italy, allowing soldiers to return to their crops and tend their field. However, this changed with the Punic Wars, which occurred between 264 and 146 BC. During these wars, Roman soldiers fought in Greece, North Africa, and even modern-day Spain. When they returned to Italy to tend their crops, they found their farms in an absolute state of ruin. With little choice, they sold their farms to the patrician elite, who absolutely exploited this opportunity to buy up as much cheap, ruined farmland as possible. Rather than paying the former veterans to work as farmers, the resulting farmland estates were staffed with the newly captured slaves from Rome's expansion, who were treated pretty terribly. This generated a ton of wealth for the elites, but absolutely screwed over the former landowners, who were forced into the city, creating a new class of urban poor. So already, we see major societal disruptions, and these poor urbaners weren't content. This gave way to populists, with the most famous attempt coming from the Gracchi brothers in 132 to 121 BC. Tiberius and Gaius served as tribune of the plebs and attempted to redistribute Rome's public land to their veterans and urban poor. These reforms threatened the interests of the senatorial elite, who owned vast estates. Rather than allow the bills to proceed to a vote, these senators used puppet tribunes to veto all possessions during which the bill could be voted on. The Gracchi understandably got fed up with this and decided to use the same veto on senatorial measures, which effectively caused the government to grind to a halt. Instead of finding a compromise, the Optimates in the Senate had the brothers killed, along with hundreds of their supporters, during violent re-election confrontations. The massacre of the Gracchi and their supporters marked the beginning of the breakdown of the Republic. By this point, the Republic was fundamentally different than it had been just a century earlier. A couple of decades later, a figure named Gaius Marius emerged. He attempted to address the manpower crisis. You see, the Roman military had a landowning requirement, but now the patricians owned all the land. Marius enacted reforms in 107 BC, which allowed landless citizens to serve in the Roman army. These reforms changed the composition of the army from landowning citizens to members of the urban poor. The generals began directly paying their men rather than the state, and the soldiers became loyal to the generals. Do you guys see any potential issues with this for long-term stability? Suddenly, direct military power was given to any populist leader who found themselves in control of an army. Historian Mary Beard remarked that this at best bypassed the interests of the state and at worst turned the legion into a private militia focused entirely on the interests of their general. So now, we have economic inequality, political violence, and armies are now loyal to their generals instead of the state. What could this possibly lead to? Oh right, civil war! You see, while Marius was in power, another general was getting incredibly popular, named Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla was voted commander of an army and sent to fight out in the east. He departed, and as they trained, the men became loyal to Sulla. But then, Marius and his supporters managed to turn things around. When Sulla got the message that his army was being transferred to Marius, he was furious. So he and his men marched back north, starting a brutal civil war. The details of this are messy, but what you need to know is that Sulla wins, gets himself declared dictator for life, and then decides to go on a revenge spree. He sets up a prescription list, killing a third of the Senate and anybody who might have sided with Marius. It was brutal. A reign of terror that Robespierre would be proud of. But wait, I thought politics was always being done the right way. That the spell broke during Julius Caesar's consulship when he gave populist speeches to drain the swamp. Yeah, alright, bro. Sulla realized that politics could not continue as it had been, and so he introduced some reforms, giving the Senate more power and curbing the influence of the populists. Believing that he had saved Roman democracy, he retired, claiming that he was a hero. Now you might be wondering how well his reforms worked out, and the answer is terribly. Within a few decades, street gangs, political violence, corruption, and bribery were all back. Clearly, not a well-functioning government, or one which was stable in the long term. Rome was also experiencing a ton of external crises, like Gauls, Germans, provincial corruption, stabilizing the borders, and especially the east. Oh, and also slave revolts. The Senate was dominated by elite aristocrats fighting to preserve their status, and populists fighting for change. And it was completely inefficient at dealing with these crises. Finally, enter Caesar. Caesar grew up during these turbulent times, and when he was a teenager, he was put in Sulla's death note, forcing the boy into hiding. This period deeply affected Caesar, but luckily for him, his family managed to convince Sulla to spare him. So he went back to the political world and slowly rose up through the ranks. It's pretty unimportant what he did, but just know that for the next few decades, he slowly gained more and more power. He tried to push through some land reforms, but the Senate refused every time. So, to get around this, he convened a secret meeting with the two other most powerful men in Rome, Pompey and Crassus. The three of them all had enemies in the Senate, but working together, they were able to force through whatever bills they wanted, dominating the Senate. The Senate, of course, was furious with Caesar, but they couldn't really do anything while he had his alliance. So Caesar was governor of northern Italy and was looking for a chance to get glory. He got it when a band of Helvetic Gauls tried to invade his territory. Caesar rushed to stop them, slaughtering them in battle. The Western Gauls were pretty impressed by this and asked him to help them deal with the Germans who were invading across the Rhine into Gaul. Caesar happily obliged and also conquered the Gallic territories along the way, which really pissed off the Gauls, and they formed a coalition to fight back. Luckily for Caesar, he was able to defeat them, despite being heavily outnumbered. This made him a huge hero in Rome, but by modern standards, yeah, I'll just let this speak for itself. Regardless, this video is about his role in politics, so yeah. Meanwhile, his political alliance had fractured. It all started when Crassus got jealous of Caesar's conquests. He decided to get his own success by invading Parthia, culminating in the Battle of Carrhae, where he got absolutely annihilated. So with Crassus out of the picture, it was just Caesar and Pompey, who were still connected with Caesar's daughter Julia, and the wife of Pompey. But then she died, so yeah, that was that. As Caesar prepared to return to Italy, the Senate realized just how popular he would be if he returned home a hero. And they absolutely freaked out. So the Senate agreed to team up with Pompey, and he switched sides. Caesar got back to Italy and was told he'd have to give up his army and stand trial for illegally raising soldiers to fight in Gaul. Had he agreed to this, he almost certainly would have been put in front of a rigged and biased jury, and at the total mercy of his political enemies. So, for him, it wasn't really much of an option. From here, he was also told that if he crossed the Rubicon, it would mean war. Now, Caesar had two options. He could wait and hope for peace while the Senate was building up their army, or he could attack now while he had the advantage. He chose to attack now, chasing Pompey into Greece and engaging him at the Battle of Pharsalus, decisively defeating Pompey's forces. Caesar was hoping to pardon the senators in Pompey, but Pompey escaped, fleeing to Egypt. Pompey was looking for support in Egypt, but ended up getting beheaded by the Egyptians, who saw Caesar coming. They hoped this would impress Caesar, but Caesar actually got really pissed, furious that a Roman consul had been treated this way. He got himself embroiled with the Egyptian civil war, and had some fun with Cleopatra. Then he returned back to Rome, victorious from the civil war. He declared that it wasn't going to be like Sulla again. He didn't want a repeat of the Reign of Terror, so he was going to give pardons to his enemies instead. Caesar had himself declared dictator for life. Now, was he being egotistical and narcissistic this whole time? Yeah, he certainly was. But as to the dictator, if you're Caesar, what choice do you really have? Let's explore it. He could either A, immediately give up power and retire, and let the Republic fall on its own. He could B, introduce reforms like Sulla had, and hope they work, before simply retiring and working with the Roman political system. It's easy to say, oh, why didn't he just have some reforms in a modern lens? But at the time, it would have been almost impossible. The empire had rapidly grown to a massive size, and the Senate could not actively administer it. I mean, they couldn't even tax or administer Gaul alone. It was extremely unstable. The Senate was inefficient, and about 250,000 legionnaires were depending on Caesar for pay. He couldn't get them this pay without dominating Roman politics, so they would have all mutinied, and Rome would have been cooked. There was also extreme wealth inequality, and I do not want to understate this. The top 1% owned around 90% of the land at this time. There were around 500 unalivings per year over debt. The elites were blocking any attempt at wealth redistribution, and the people were extremely unsatisfied. Or Caesar could take a third option, take power as dictator, fix the structural issues plaguing the Republic, and then finally retire when he was satisfied. Now, it's debated if he actually would have retired, but many ancient historians believe he would. They claim that he intended to retire to a life of leisure after fixing the Republic. As dictator, Caesar's policies were pretty reasonable, or at least his public policies. He attempted to fix the economic crisis through debt relief and land redistributions. He also set up a bunch of Roman colonies, like rebuilding the old destroyed city of Carthage, allowing tens of thousands of Romans a second chance at a better life. He noticed the current calendar was off by about 3 months, and so with the help of an Egyptian astronomer, he created a new unified calendar called the Julian calendar, with the introduction of the leap year. Caesar also increased the size of the Senate, adding both Gauls and Italians. This allowed for a much fairer and more diverse representation in Roman politics, but, of course, this just infuriated the old senators. Caesar then underwent a massive series of public construction projects, and he prioritized hiring freedmen over slaves, which created tens of thousands of jobs. The most underrated of which was the Septa Julia, an enclosed space with armed guards where people could safely vote, free from riots or any sort of voting violence. It's hard to understate how massive this was, because that had been an issue that was absolutely plaguing the Republic prior to this. He then expanded Rome's aqueduct system, bringing fresh water into the city of Rome. He also drained the marshlands, which added a ton of farmland. But Caesar's best idea was one that would unfortunately remain in the plans. He contacted Marcus Terentius Varro, who began laying the groundwork for the building of a massive library in Rome, one that would surpass even the Great Library of Alexandria. It was to be a centerpiece of philosophy, science, and education. Who knows what would have happened if this had gone through? But, unfortunately, before it could, some people started to get really jealous and fearful of Caesar. The senators, many of whom were people that Caesar had actually pardoned prior to this, planned to kill him. And, well, you know how the story goes from here. After his death, the library project was abandoned, never to be picked back up again. Mark Antony read out Caesar's will to the plebs, which showed that his fortunes were to be given to them upon his death. When he then revealed Caesar's butchered corpse, the citizens of Rome became furious. They rioted, burning down the houses of the senators involved and forcing them to flee Rome. Another series of civil wars broke out, and the Republic predictably collapsed afterwards into a dictatorial monarchy system, with Octavian or Augustus taking charge. So in short, the Republic was extremely unstable and unjust, and the framework that it was a beautiful democracy before Julius Caesar destroyed everything could not be further from the truth. If you made it this far, I hope you learned a thing or two. That's the video. Thanks for sticking in. Bye.